Good afternoon, welcome back. As some of you may know, the London Symphony Orchestra performs here, and backstage is the green room for the conductor, and it turns out that in that green room is a beautiful grand piano. As some of you know, or may know, I play piano, and I went there. I thought maybe before I give this talk in front of all of you, I would go out there, play a little bit, kind of relax a little bit, and it was locked. So it turns out the unplayable piano is just back there. Speaking of which, I'm going to take 30 seconds to do this real quick. I was a failed musician for many years in bands trying to get to play venues like this. And since we never made it as a band, and now that I'm finally here in front of all of you, I am going to take a selfie very, very quickly here. And we're going to do this together, and you're all going to be in it. So wave, say hey. All right, there it is. Okay. It's 30 seconds of my time that I ate to do that. I hope it'll be good. All right, let's talk about this. Lean startup, agile, product discovery. These are words that we hear at work all the time, and they seem to work really well, especially when you read the material on them at single team levels. But when you take that material and you start to scale it out to 2 teams, 5 teams, 50 teams, hundreds of teams, it seems to break. What I want to talk about today is why that is and some ideas about how we can get around that, to start to think about ways to scale lean at the project level, at the program level, and at the portfolio level. So the first thing I want to get this out of the way, the dirty secret of lean startup is this: no one wants to buy experiments. People want to buy apps. They want to buy solutions. They want to buy a product of some kind. They don't want to buy an experiment from you. Whether you're a consultant, whether you're in-house, selling experimentation is tough to do. Now, the interesting thing is that lean startup reduces risk by experimentation regularly and continuously. And when you take the concepts behind lean startup and you combine it with agile, with the cadences, the rhythms of Scrum, Kanban, whatever form of agile that you're using, you start to build this practice of continuous learning. You've got kind of this regular sense of when we're going to experiment, when we're going to learn, when we can potentially shift course. And at the core of this continuous learning is experimentation and humility. Humility being the key word here, right? There is a requirement for lean and lean startup and agile ways of thinking to take root, is to have a humble mindset, because we work in software. Software is complex and unpredictable. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like when we're done. In fact, it's never done. And we know even less about what our customers are actually going to do with it. And so this requires, to adopt this way of working, it requires the organization, top down, to adopt a position of humility and to embrace uncertainty, the uncertainty of not knowing exactly where we're going, right? Now, if you work in a startup, and if you work at this startup, I want to work here because that's the coolest conference room I've ever seen. But if you work in a startup, it's experiment or die, right? You know this, right? You know exactly what your choices are. You know what the consequences of those choices are. You know who you have to do the work, and more importantly, you know who you don't have to do the work. You should have a good sense of what you don't know, and most importantly, you know how much runway you have. And if you make the wrong decisions a couple of times in a row, you're out of business and you're done. In big companies, not so much. Right? Big companies typically have large piles of money, right? And with the benefit of that scale comes great responsibility. You have access to large teams. You have access to broad disciplines. You have access to specialists. You have seemingly endless runway. And if you make the wrong decision about a feature or a product or a step in the roadmap, you might get fired, but in most cases, nothing happens. Right? And most of these organizations assume that they already know everything. And so you keep spinning on products and services and extending their lives without this position of humility or any experimentation or learning. And yet, with all of my clients, everywhere I go, it's these two talking heads of agile and lean. We want to be like a startup. We want to practice agile. We want to be a lean startup. Right? Every company that I meet is doing it. How many of you work in an agile environment? Raise your hand. Right? Pretty much everybody, right? Exactly. Everybody says that and they want to be like a startup. But it turns out that when you take these concepts of continuous learning, experimentation, and humility, and you stretch it, right, to 5 teams, to 50 teams, to 500 teams, it starts to break, right? And the question is why? Why does this seem to break at scale when we start to take these ideas out and beyond? And so I did a little bit of scientific research, and by scientific research, I mean I asked Twitter, and I said, why does lean break at scale? And these are just some of the responses that I got back to my question. Now, some of these may look familiar to you, some may not. Right? For example, we already know what we need to do. Why do we need to waste time learning? Right? We know exactly what we need to do. Good enough doesn't get respected as a viable option. Process, approvals, and my favorite, the mysterious they, right? That block anything that's not get it out the door as fast as possible, right? Upfront ROI, business cases, right? Before we actually can start to do anything, set deadlines, silos, short-term business needs, and established corporations concerned that we are going to ruin our brand with experimentation and MVPs. And this is just a sample of the answers that I got from my scientific study on the internet. And so the question then becomes, how? How do we start to move big organizations past some of these hurdles? Now, there's a lot of ways to think about scaling these practices. I'm going to put forward a couple of frameworks for you to think about, for you to use as starting points, and then you can kind of figure out how they work in your organizations. The one I want you to think about is this, project level. Right? At the project level, the question is, how do we incorporate more learning into each initiative? You have a team that's willing to learn. How do we get them to do that on a regular basis? As you scale to multiple teams, you're looking at a program-level question of how do we coordinate multiple product discovery and delivery efforts focused on the same goal. And at the portfolio, at the company level, the question starts to get more difficult. How do we coordinate multiple programs? How do we enforce governance, right? Legal, compliance. And how do we meet shareholder expectations? We're already in business. We've got lots of moving parts. How do we make sure that we don't ruin any of that? And there are specific challenges for scaling lean at each one of those levels. And I want to show you kind of what I think are a good set to think about for each one of those. So at the project level, right? At the team level specifically, most teams that I work with optimize for throughput, for velocity, for getting things out the door as quickly as possible. That's what they're incentivized to do. They struggle with making product discovery and delivery work together, and we've heard a lot about this today, in fact, no autonomy to make decisions, right? So even if they're learning, they can't use that information to make a decision on their own. They've got to run it up for approvals. They have an incremental mindset driven by their incentive for velocity, right? Let's make stuff, and more stuff, and more stuff, and more stuff, as opposed to going back and making sure that the stuff that we ship makes sense and we optimize it. And then, again, the perceived risk to brand and current customers is always front and center. Now, as you move into the program level, the problems start to get a little bit bigger, right? Cross-team coordination and knowledge management. How do we make sure that we're not stepping on each other's toes and that we're leveraging learning from each other to do that? We have to start shipping on larger legacy systems. We start to run out of people, and so we either offshore, which starts to break our collaboration, our cross-functional collaboration, or we distribute across offices, across countries, and across time zones, which again makes it difficult to build this continuous conversation about what we're learning and how we should adjust course. Now, at the portfolio level, things get even more complicated, right? We're looking at discipline and business unit silos. Right? So we've got business units that don't talk to other business units. We've got marketing that's at odds with design. We've got product management. We've got IT, right? IT is a service provider. If you're a business of scale or a business that seeks to scale in the 21st century, you are in the software business. IT as a service provider is antithetical to that. Right? Technology is not just something that somebody else does over there, it's how we run our business. And yet most of the companies that I work with treat it as its own separate practice. Right? It's fundamental to the way businesses run in the 21st century. Short-term optimization for business value, annual planning cycles. Right? We can predict the future. Right? We know exactly what's going to happen next year. We know exactly how much money we need to spend to address that. We know exactly what to build. So let's plan that now and hope that that works out next year. Incentive structures, again, focused around delivery. Governance becomes challenging, right? As you've got multiple teams learning and changing things and experimenting, how do you ensure that you're in compliance in healthcare, in financial services, and in other data-sensitive industries? And this last one's interesting, Conway's Law, but in reverse. Conway's Law is the law that says that we build systems to mirror our organizational structures. So there's a lot of companies that have done that, and now they're trying to change their organizational structure, and it doesn't fit with the systems that they've already built. So there's a lot of friction there as well. And so, when you start to look at ways to solve for all of these problems, there are no shortage of recipes. Right? Lots of people out there selling silver bullets about how to solve for Agile at scale, or Lean at scale, or Lean Startup at scale. My favorite one that's very, very popular these days is this one. How many of you are familiar with this particular diagram? Yeah? If you're not familiar with it, this is called SAFE, because it's safe. It's the Scaled Agile framework, and it's one way that's become very popular to scale Agile and continuous learning in theory into an organization. And managers and executives love SAFE. Do you know why? Because they can see themselves in the picture. Right? There I am. Right? That's me. Look, the reality is it's because they don't have to change. Right? This framework gives managers a pass. It says, look, at the lower levels, at the project level, at the program level, everyone's got to shift the way that they're working. But you, at the portfolio level, can still manage the same way. And there's a lot of friction with organizations that try to do this. Now, look, as a framework, it's fine. As a place to start, it's fine. Right? Something to strive for and then evolve from. But these frameworks are not endpoints. And so to think about how to take these frameworks and evolve them into a way that makes sense where you work, start to think about the principles that you'd like to scale as opposed to the processes that you'd like to scale. In other words, how do you want to work? Not what are the rituals necessarily that you want to practice every day, but how do you want to work? And I want to give you 4 principles to think about that will help you scale humility, continuous learning, experimentation, product discovery into the way that you're working, and then specific tactics for each one to bring back to work. So let's start with the first one. Principle number 1, customer value and business value are the same thing. If you build a product that makes your customers successful, if you build a product that respects their time, that's a delight to use, that solves real problems in a meaningful way, your customers will reward your business with loyalty, with repeat business, with word of mouth, marketing, and promotion. Right? So many companies get lost on optimizing for short-term business goals, but putting the customer first guarantees the longevity of that customer doing business with you. And I want to share with you a few tactics for making sure that as you manage your products and as you plan your work, you're always keeping the customer front and center. The first is this one, OKRs. How many are familiar with OKRs? Got a good bunch of folks. OKRs are outcomes, right? They're measures of customer behavior. And they're a great way to think about how to make sure as an organization, as a portfolio, as a program, and as a project, you're always doing something that is related to the customer. Now, there's 2 components to it. There's an objective side of it, which is the aspirational component. It's qualitative, it's inspirational, and it's time-bound. In other words, by a certain date, we will achieve some level of success or some goal, and these must be actionable by the team independently, particularly in large companies. We want teams to feel like they can hit their own goals with minimal dependencies on other folks. Now, the KR, the key results part here, is the how will we know section, right? It's quantifiable. This is a number. How will we know we've met our objective? It's difficult to hit, but not impossible. And it cascades down throughout the organization. So at the portfolio level, we set portfolio level OKRs. And then we figure out what the KRs are, what the OKRs are at the program level that are leading indicators of those organizational goals. And then at the team level, those cascade down further to make sure that we are always looking at these outcomes as our goals. Now, I want to show you an example of what I mean by that. Here's an example of OKRs, right? So our objective at the company level is to be the dominant platform for car dealer inventory management by Q4 2016, right? That's a big goal for a company, right? A big portfolio level goal. And we've got several key results that are measurable. 50% of all independent dealers are our users. That's customer behavior. You can measure that. You can optimize for that. 6 of the top 10 car makers mandate that our platform be used for their dealerships. Again, customer behavior that we can measure for a different audience. Right? 40% of auto auction houses using our API. Again, these are all customer measures of success. There's nothing in here specifically about launching a set of features. And if we find out that a feature is not valuable or doesn't help to drive our KR, we shift course. Now, what's interesting is that you can take these OKRs and you can use them to reduce your planning horizons down to quarters, for example. I'm going to give you an example of a quarter, but it doesn't matter. Whatever cycle it is, you can reduce it down for a year. And here's what that looks like. Okay? You've got a team working towards their OKR. We've given them a time period, right? Not a set of features to ship by a deadline, but a goal to reach, an outcome to reach by a set time. Let's say it's a quarter. The team is shipping product, they're shipping experiments, they're talking to customers. They're sensing how that work changes customer behavior in relation to the goal that they've set for themselves. And they're responding independently in real time to that feedback. At the end of that quarter, the team comes up in front of the organization and says, you tasked us with increasing retention by 50%. We've increased retention by 12%. Here's what we did. Here's what we learned. And if you fund us, essentially it's a funding conversation, for another quarter, here's what we plan on doing. What you've empowered your executives and your decision makers with here is evidence. Evidence that says we are spending our resources in a good direction. Let's fund these guys again for another quarter. Or you've given them the evidence to say, you know what? That's terrific. We're never going to hit 50%. Or 12% is good enough. We've got a new priority. Let's move you over to something else. But the decisions are based on a shorter time frame and based on customer success metrics. So you've always got customer value at the core of your planning conversations. Now, if you want to layer one more tactic on top of that, we can talk about horizon planning. Horizon planning, made popular by McKinsey, made popular by Intuit, essentially says there are 3 time horizons that you can use to measure your progress. Each one of those time horizons has a different level of staffing and has a different set of questions, in other words, customer outcomes, OKRs, that you're optimizing for. Horizon 3 is your short term. It's your R&D lab. It's where you're trying to figure out what you should work on next. And the questions and the outcomes that you're looking for are customer-centric. Is there a need for this thing that we're working on? Can we find a solution that meets that need? And the metrics that you use to measure your progress and your team's progress are based on the answers to these questions. And you have a smaller number of folks working here. If the work that the teams are doing there hits the goals, the teams move to Horizon 2, where we're asking sustainability-related questions. Is the market large enough? Is it sustainable? Can we support growth? If you hit those objectives, we've got our biggest teams waiting in the long-term horizon asking growth-related questions. How do we scale? How do we continuously improve? How do we stay competitive? So that's our first principle. Customer value equals business value. The second principle is to value learning over delivery. We don't have time to learn. We absolutely need it. Right? This is the ROI of product discovery and lean startup. And some of the tactics to help you build a culture of learning are pilot teams. Right? You don't have to change your entire organization overnight. Build a small team or 2 teams whose goal is to learn, not to ship product necessarily, and not to make money. Their velocity will be slower, but that's okay. Right? Let them figure out how to do this within the confines of your organization, and let them get good at this, and then scale that out into multiple teams. To help them navigate the waters of your company, build them some sandboxes, both digital ones that give them a safe place to try new ideas, as well as organizational ones that tell them what kind of learning is okay and where those limits are. Right? You can only talk to 100 customers a month. That's better than 0. Right? Carve out those guidelines and give them the freedom to go figure those things out. And what this does is it starts to encourage creative experimentation with your teams. When you give them these digital sandboxes and these guidelines, they figure out how to learn what they need to learn. I love this experiment. Can you guys see what this is? This is a contactless card. And the team is testing how the card performs against various card readers. Now, they could have manually sat there and tapped each one of those things 1,000 times a day, right? Instead, they put it on a track, on a train, and just spun it around. Right? Get creative with your experiments. So we've got customer value equals business value. We've got valuing learning over delivery. Our third principle is radical transparency. Anytime you try to change an organization, change the way that it works at scale, people get scared. The more transparent you are with how you're working, the less people fear this particular change. And one of the great ways to do this is through rituals. Right? Get people to practice things like stand-ups, demo days, progress reports, scrum of scrums, anything that exposes the work that you're doing. People don't think that they're learning anything through that. They feel like, I got to go to stand-up again today, I'm not learning much. Right? But in the end, you know, initially you're starting to paint the fence, and then ultimately you're learning karate. Right? And it's that transparency that gets you to that level of trust and that continuous learning mindset. It helps teams to learn from each other, to see what others have done, and to use it on their teams, which produces duplicate effort. Simon Cross on this stage earlier today, every time he talked about when they made a change to the Facebook product, he said, when we looked into it. Did you pick up on that? When we looked into it. Right? How many of you look into things in your company, right? Not a whole lot of hands going up, right? Access to customers brings transparency. They're the ultimate test of whether what you're working on is valid or not. The more that we can give our teams access to customers to talk to them on a regular basis, what Jared Spool calls exposure hours, to make sure that everybody understands how this is working for customers, the more transparent we are about why we're making certain product decisions. Right? It doesn't work for our customers. And at the same time, we want to provide access to data. Right? Don't make the analytics, the usage data, difficult to get to. Don't hide it behind BI queues that have X amount of hours. Elevate that body of knowledge and that information to a point where anybody can get any kind of data they need inside your organization about what people are doing with your products without having to write a SQL query. Now, the last principle I want to talk about is humility in all things. Shit. Sorry about that. That was the wrong photo. I'm not sure what happened there. Humility. That guy's humble. We'll go with that guy, right? We talked about customer value, learning, and radical transparency. Humility. Just because we've always done things one way doesn't mean we should continue doing it in that way. Approach your work, approach your processes with strong opinions, but be willing to change your mind in the face of overwhelming evidence. And there's lots of tactics to make this happen. Product discovery is a terrific way to start to put a little bit of humility into what you're working on. This is the Amazon Echo. When they started working on this, they wanted to simply learn what questions people would ask this thing and what kind of responses were good enough. So what they did was they put a box, the box in one room with a test participant, and an engineer in another room. The test participant would talk to the box, the engineer would type in Google queries, and then feed those responses back to the test participant to see if those were sufficiently good enough answers. Right? Product discovery helps you get a sense of what you're trying to learn that quickly, and to be humble in the face of evidence that you perhaps you made a bad decision about what to work on before you invest too heavily in it. A couple more things to think about when it comes to humility. As we start to scale continuous learning, as we start to scale lean startup and product discovery and agile, we have to start looking at our staffing models with a new lens. Right? This is humility at the portfolio level. There are jobs that we carry with us simply because they've always been with us. And as you build autonomous, empowered, self-organizing teams that are making their own decisions, there might be some jobs that we need to transition into new roles. I'm going to throw out a couple job titles, and we'll assess by the groans in the audience how many of that job title are here. Project manager. Save me. Scrum masters, business analysts, right? Are these roles that we truly need with continuous learning teams? Something to think about, or are they adding process for process's sake as you grow, as the company grows? Another thing to think about is your tech stack. Are you providing your teams with a modern enough tech stack at the portfolio level that allows them to build continuous learning into what they're doing? And again, this really boils down to DevOps, right? How long does it take you to go from prototype to production? The goal here is to make product delivery a non-event. When that becomes a non-event, we can start to test new ideas much more rapidly, which builds continuous learning and humility at all levels, at the project, at the program, at the portfolio level. Look, to wrap up, this is a top-down effort. You and your teams already want to work this way. We need executive support. We need humility at the executive layer to say, we are running a software-based business. A software-based business is different. We have to embrace that uncertainty and build the kind of practice that allows us to ensure that we're always working on the right things and delivering them the right way. And to do that, if you're not that executive, go find them, okay? This is what I call that executive, and forgive me if you are that executive. Okay, but what I mean by that is you're looking for the person inside your organization who has the clout to carve out a safe space for you and your teams to try out continuous learning, lean startup, product discovery, to give you that time to figure out how to do this and to protect you from all the organizational crap that would normally kill that kind of effort. Find this person, or become this person, and carve out that space for your teams. And so to wrap this up, lean processes that work at any scale. We've got customer value equals business value. We're going to value learning over delivery. We're going to be transparent in all things. And then lastly, please be humble in your work that you do. Thank you very much.